This session is recorded. It will be on Spotify. I know, crazy to think that we're on Spotify, Giles, after our fourth event, but thank you to Lauren for facilitating that and putting that into place. And thank you to everybody who's attended these before and coming back to this one. And apologies for opening the call a bit late. So this session, as I said, the fourth roundtable that we've done is all about hybrid working. So we've got Leah here, who's the Smarter Ways of Working Program Manager from the Government Property Agency. Oh, that's a tongue twister, that, isn't it? A great title. So we've invited Leah along. Me and Leah have known each other for a number of years now. We worked together in Company's House, and then when we were discussing agendas for this session, we just had a good brainwave to get Leah involved and invite her along, as we have with all our previous sessions where we invite a guest speaker to give us their view on the topic in question. This topic is obviously pertinent at the moment with COVID, work from home, working in the office, what the future office looks like. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of good conversation and discussion around the topics that Leah brings. So as always, if you have any questions, please do feel free to raise your hand on the Teams chat window, actually the button that says raise your hand, and then whoever's speaking at that point in time will come to you and ask you to ask your questions or present your view. Alternatively, please use the chat window as well, so you could put a question or a viewpoint into the chat window and we'll pick it up and answer the question, or kind of bring that viewpoint into the conversation. And yeah, that's about it really. Nothing else from me. Giles, do you want to do a quick intro of yourself, mate, and we'll go from there?
So yeah, thanks, Joel. So the fourth one, which is surprising that we've got to fourth. Our fourth meeting, so it's really good to be here. I'm program director for a cross government IT interoperability program, but on the side I am leading on AV hardware standards for the government smarter working program. So we're looking, it's part of a wider hybrid working program. It's looking about how we enable hybrid working across the civil services, really close to what I'm doing, and actually Leah is part of that program and feeding into that program as well. So it will be really interesting to discuss this topic and to get some of the views from yourselves who have joined the call.
Cool, thanks Giles, much appreciated. So Leah, hybrid working, the new norm. Do you want to do a bit of an intro about yourself and what your role is and the program that is the Smarter Working program, and go from there?
Yeah, happy to. So first of all, Joel and Giles, thanks very much for having me along. It's really great to be here with you this afternoon, and hopefully we have a really interesting and lively debate about this topic. So hopefully it's going to be interesting to everyone. So I'm Leah Jones. I'm the Smarter Working Programme Manager at the Government Property Agency, and our programme is supporting departments all across government and their exec agencies to implement smarter working. And for those who may not be familiar with the term smarter working, because it does have quite a few kind of guises and different names, smarter working is basically all about ensuring people have the choice and the empowerment to decide when and where and how they do their work. It's very much about kind of like that trust and that empowerment, and that people have that kind of education and that trust to balance their personal needs along with the organisation and the team needs, and that we treat people like adults really, and that they can kind of make those decisions themselves. And ensure that their priorities are delivered and they can work to the best of their ability. So smarter working is based on 4 main pillars. So those are technology. So it's about making sure that people have the mobile technology so that they can work from anywhere. It's about having the different workspaces within an office, so that whether someone needs to do like a report and they need a task focused space, or they need some kind of like touchdown spaces to do emails, or they need collaboration spaces, whether that's kind of like in a small group in terms of like having a small booth, or like bigger project spaces, and having breakout spaces, to kind of like that rest and relax and have more informal chats. But it's about providing those different spaces and having the culture then around that, so that people are educated and they kind of like work in that way, where they move around those different spaces, whether they're in the office, whether they're somewhere else. And then it's also about having that leadership, so that people are managing and leaders are managing by outputs as opposed to presenteeism, and that they're kind of role modeling and empowering people to work in this way. So it's quite a fine balance across those 4 pillars. And we've been running the programme for a number of years, supporting, as I mentioned, government departments to implement smarter working. And we were kind of like, chugging along quite nicely with that programme. And then something called COVID happened, and everything obviously changed overnight. So we went from being very office-based, across the globe, to being forced to work from home. And we did have a bit of confusion with that, really, in terms of some departments and some people kind of thinking, well, that's smarter working cracked. We've kind of, we've done it. People can work from home now. But as we were saying, smarter working was all about choice. And obviously that is one of the things that COVID took away from us, was that choice. We didn't have a choice about where we were working. And so forced working from home is not smarter working. We don't have those options about where we work and how we work. And then we were kind of like starting to look towards the future, and there's a lot of talk in terms of post-COVID ways of working, and that's where this term hybrid working came up, and it became a bit of a buzzword, really, in terms of hybrid working. And again, that caused a bit of confusion in terms of what is hybrid working, what does it mean, is that different to smarter working? So we started to do a bit of work and put a bit of thought into that, really. And hybrid working really just kind of replaces that place bit in terms of where you're working. So to be a hybrid worker and to working in a different place, you still need those pillars that we talked about in smarter working. You still need that culture to support you. You still need that leadership to empower you. You definitely still need that technology to be able to work from everywhere. And when you're in the office, you still need those different choices about the different spaces. So like I said, it became a bit of a buzzword, and it caused a bit of confusion, but we've kind of like pulled it back a bit now to kind of talk about, well, actually, that's just the one element of smarter working. So I'm going to pause there just to kind of see if there's any thoughts, because I see Giles noting a few things down.
I think even from that a kind of overview, Leah, like just the language as well, so there's obviously terms, I think, across the workspace, that your program that you're running, like you said, collaboration spaces, breakouts, touchdown spaces, task focus spaces, that are language or words that a business runner like myself just isn't familiar with. They were new enough to make me go, I'm going to write those down and come back to them. How do getting that language, that new language, kind of embedded in culture is a massive task, isn't it? But one I guess we'll discuss in more detail throughout the call. But it's just exciting to hear the new language and the new terms being used. It's a step change, isn't it, to how we operate and how we talk.
Yeah, definitely. And there's been a lot of work kind of going into this. So there's a government property agency design guide that kind of goes into a bit more detail about these different types of spaces and when you would use them. But there's a whole education and a business change needed around that, so that people understand, and kind of think about, when they're planning their day and what they need to do, that they do use the most appropriate spaces. So, if you need to write that report and you need a quiet space, don't sit in the middle of the breakout spaces unless you like that buzz. And it's about understanding yourself and the way that you work and understanding what you need to do. So if you're someone who likes all that buzz around you and that's how you work the best, then, kind of like use the appropriate space. But if you need that quiet, then go to a quiet space and do that. And if you need to grab someone and kind of like have a chat with them, then kind of like move away from the quiet spaces and go and, use those collaborative spaces. So I suppose it's about understanding yourself, understanding others, being aware of the different sorts of spaces and when and how to use them. But you're right, Joel, there's a lot of business change needs to go along with that.
So just going on back to some of your comments, Leah. So I'm interested to hear, or to see in the chat box, to ask those people on the call on some of these points, because you picked up on presenteeism, you picked up on cultural change, you picked up on the why. I mean, one of the main things for me is the why. Like, why are we going back into the office? I think I've heard a lot of times from people that I've spoken to ad hoc or in surveys, reaching out to different communities on Slack, the channel we use. why are we coming back into the office, and that experience, and what are we providing? Because a lot of the people that I've spoken to feel they are effective at working from home. There is a benefit for them personally, but from a business perspective, the departments that I work in or engage with want people to come back into the office because there's a benefit to the business. So there's a fundamental dichotomy there between the benefit to the user and the benefit to the business. And what I'd be interested to hear, if anyone's got any thoughts, either chuck it in the chat. Just what do you see as some of the issues that are being asked to come back into the office? Some of the things that you don't want to happen, because, and for example, the presenteeism, I think that's a really important point. It almost feels in some ways that we want to come back into the office because we may not be a particularly good manager. And so having someone sat at a desk means you can define the fact that they're in work doing something, or you perceive that they're doing something, whether or not they're actually doing anything while they're in work. It's an easy metric to say, actually, that person's doing anything. They're not just sat at home watching Netflix. So I think there's a whole bunch of things to unpack here around cultural change, presenteeism, and then the why. What are we coming back into the office for?
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point, Giles, as well, in terms of is this period that we've spent at home, like these 18 months, perhaps, when we get towards the end of it, fingers crossed, and we do kind of like be able to have that freedom to move around. Is that going to be enough for those managers who have that sort of approach that you're referring to? Is that going to be long enough for them to have adjusted and changed their ways of working and their ways of managing? And I think at the start of the pandemic, this was quite a big issue for some managers, because it was almost like their job was to manage by observing people, by being able to see that they're present. So if they weren't present, what was their job? And surely as a manager, you'd like to think that as a managers, we can kind of grow in terms of like our leadership skills. And that takes kind of like experience and practice. That is not the ways of managing. Is, my job is to make sure that I can see everyone sat in front of the computer. And if we're smarter workers and people are using different spaces, then that's not the way you're going to be managing. Whether someone,
how would you manage?
Yeah, whether someone's in a meeting room or a collaboration space, or in a task-focused area, or in a breakout space. If we're truly smarter workers, it doesn't matter whether someone is in the office using a different space or at home. But I think it's a really important point, Giles, and I think this is one of the biggest stumbling blocks we've always had with smarter working is how do I lead a smarter working team?
And I think that's in like a really important point. I think like for managers actually assigning tasks and executing, absolutely agree with how do you become a good manager. But even for a leader in a business, how do you set a good example when you work from home? You're not engaged with the individuals, it's the standards in which you set. I mean, in iCoTech, I kind of try my best to always, set the standard. If Craig beats me into work in the morning, it annoys me. It's just in my DNA to beat him the next day, get in earlier. If he's here late, I want to be here later than him. It's an old school model. I know it's not actually correct or efficient, but it's that kind of, you want to lead by example and set the bar to a certain to how you behave, how you interact. And when you're not engaging with everybody in the organization, because your touch points are only your 8 hours in a day and potentially the 8 meetings you have with people throughout the day, how do you influence everybody in the organization as a leader tries to, I guess. It is.
I think that's really important, Joel. You just talked about sort of the role modeling of behaviors. I think from my experience working with Joel, here's a very collaborative way of working. It's very engaging. He wants to be with people, engaged, have that relationship. I think role modeling is another really important part of hybrid working. If we're looking at changing the way we work and the way we expect our employees to work, and if hybrid working has changed that, then one of the things that I've sort of raised to senior leadership is the majority of the time when they were in the office previously, they were in meetings. They'd bounce from meeting room to meeting room to meeting room. If we're expecting our employees to work, or the employees or colleagues to work in a certain way, then we have to have leadership embody that. So if we are talking about collaboration spaces, if we're talking about having opportunities for junior members of staff to learn by sort of experience or learn by overseeing what our senior members of staff are doing, engage in that. That's how they need to role model it. For you saying, so Joel, you want to get into the office early, absolutely, that's how it works for you and your colleagues. But you will have also created that relationship with the people that you work with. Being an SME, you're able to build that relationship with people to say, actually, this is how I work. I want to empower you to make a decision on how you work, but I'm also going to embody some of that change myself. I'm not just going to sit in a meeting room. So I think there's a big thing about role modeling and ensuring that leadership actually adhere to what they're saying, and they actually embody that and role model those changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And Leah, a question for you. You talked about the design guide, because we talked about those workspaces terms that you were using, which I've written down, and I think we planted the seed in our planning session about a desk, and I said building desk booking apps, and then you were like, well, who said you need a desk, Joel? Don't need a desk booking app anymore. And I was like, oh well, that's just a waste of all my development, my desk booking app, but oh well. But is there a kind of guide that's available to people outside of government to consume, or will there be a guide, do you think, in the future on what those spaces are and what they're designed for? For someone like me, I guess creating a new environment, a new office, which is actually happening for iCoTech, when trying not even to call it an office, it's actually iCoHub, but I keep going back to office because it's a community collaboration project, but actually being able to take best practice as a guide and what those spaces should be would be really cool for business leaders like myself, I guess.
Yeah, I'm just Googling now, Joel, just to see if you can find it.
I think it was online.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
.uk.
Yeah, you'd find it. It is on .gov.uk. It's the Government Workplace Design Guide. If you Google that, you'll find it in there.
Awesome.
And I just open it now to make sure.
Well, you mean Bing? You mean Bing search rather than Google search, right?
There are other
search
engines available online.
Yeah, so if you use that, you'll find the Government Workplace Design Guide, which has been produced by the Government Property Agency. And that talks about all those different spaces. Because you're quite right, Joel. We were having a chat about, which we can come to later, in terms of making sure there's adequate space for people. And we were talking about desk booking. And our thoughts within the Government Property Agency is desk booking doesn't really aid smarter working. So as I was talking about those different spaces and moving around different spaces, booking a desk for desk-based activities, which we found for a lot of people, those desk-based activities work very well at home, and we'll come on to that a bit later on. Why would they book a desk when actually a lot of people, or a high percentage of people, have got a home environment that is supporting that very well?
If I can ask you a question, Leah, what are the benefits of a desk booking app? Because I think we've got to look at it both ways. And I think there are some benefits that people who may work in a more traditional fashion within their teams, and they're looking more for that social contact and to avoid, and I actually had a call with the consultancy today about it, trying to avoid creating cliques within your department. So I think if you don't have that sort of formal area, and I'm sure this is something GPA have looked at, is having sort of specific areas for groups of workers, so digital business unit, finance business unit, whatever. But if you don't give people sort of those areas, or people aren't grouped in those certain areas, you actually start to create cliques of people who are friends who want to sit together, rather than having groups of people who would work together. So I don't know, there are some benefits to desk booking, but I do agree with you from a pure sort of hybrid working, collaboration, sort of fluid working environment, having your specific desk also is a drain of resource. How long do you keep that desk for? When do you clean it? Is it 4 hours? Do you have it for a whole day? Et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very interesting. So I'd just be interested to hear from a GPA perspective, what the considerations are that maybe some of the civil service is considering, why they're considering having desk booking.
Yeah, and some departments are still considering it, and it's for a lot of the reasons that you've mentioned there, Giles, that in terms of the way people want to work going forward, and I think this is something that we all need to be aware of, is that how we like to work as an individual will differ greatly from person to person. So some people have loved the home working experience and it's worked really well for them, and they want to continue, 5 days a week, 4 days a week, 3 days, whatever it is kind of like that sliding scale. But for other people, it just doesn't work for a vast variety of reasons. And those people actually would prefer to be in the office. So how do we make sure that we're providing the spaces for people who may only want to come in once a week, once a month, through to those people who want to be there 5 times a week? And there are some people, for, you know, whether it's to do with their role or to do with their home environment or accessibility needs, may be better off working in the office. So we have spoken to some departments who are kind of like reserving desks for people who have expressed a preference to be in the office 5 days a week, or, you know, for whatever reason, whether it's home, whether accessibility, you know, whatever, that they are kind of like reserving desks for those people. Other departments still want to do desk booking. We have got concerns across GPA if you're doing that as a blanket for those reasons. You know, if you're offering desk booking, should you offer quiet space booking? Should you offer collaboration booking? Should you offer booking for all those other types of spaces? So you kind of think, you know, desks are just one of those types of spaces. Where does it stop?
Are you going to include a ping pong table in that as well for when you want a one-to-one? You don't want a ping pong match to talk about, you know, the customer project. Giles, can you imagine having a ping pong battle as we're talking about the scope of your last project?
I'm actually quite good at ping pong, so I'd probably be all right with that.
So, and Leah, one of your topics I think was around insights from the home working survey, which you were going to touch on. I think that's important. That's kind of a nice segue into that. Do you want to take us through that and the findings from that survey?
Yeah, happy to. I'm going to refer to my screen just so I get my facts and figures right, because I don't want to be misquoting what we had from the survey. So last summer, we were about 3 or 4 months into the pandemic. So last July, August, Government Property Agency sponsored a home working survey. And it was really to kind of understand how people were coping at home, how they were managing with their work, you know, what was the experience like for them? Could they be productive from home? What was working, what wasn't, you know, how could we support them more? How could their department support them more? So we ran the survey. We had 35 government agencies or government departments took part, and we had 26,000 responses. So we have got quite a large data set there that we collected last summer. So some of the things that we found, activities that were working well from home. So individual focused desk-based work, which you would probably assume would work quite well from home. Planned meetings, audio and video conferences were working very well, thanks, you know, in no parts of the technology that was rolled out in the speed that it was rolled out in. Telephone conversations, private conversations, business confidential conversations and meetings were all working well from home. And there's kind of like individual routine tasks that people were completing. So those are working well. Things that were a bit more of a challenge from home, relaxing and taking a break. We were finding a lot of people weren't really making time for that, that there seemed to be a lot working longer days, and there seemed to be a lot more pressure and back-to-back meetings. Learning from others, because you haven't got that kind of water cooler kind of moments and that kind of co-location. Informal social interaction, so people were missing that kind of like that buzz and that that kind of like human contact that we get from being close to people and being around people, and having those conversations that are just casual, you know, like, what did you watch on telly last night? What are you doing on the weekend? We just seem to be far more work-based now. Informal and planned meetings weren't working as well, and spreading out paper or materials. People just haven't really got the room for it at home. So they were kind of like swings and roundabouts. Some things were going well, some things weren't going so well, and that people were struggling with a bit more. So a bit of an overview then. We asked people whether they felt that their home environment enabled them to work productively, and 80% of them agreed that it did, which was a really, really high percentage, and probably far higher than we thought it was going to be. But that does mean that 1 in 5 people are struggling still to be able to work productively from home. 81% of people said that they're able to share ideas and knowledge amongst colleagues, and they've got the access to the information they needed to do their work. Again, I think that was due to the speed of the technology, whether that was video conferencing, or whether it's kind of like your online document storage and things like that, and document sharing. Technology, 82% of people said they had the technology that they needed. Again, I think there was a really, really speedy rollout across government and probably across like the private sector as well, in terms of getting that technology out there. But there were a few things that people were struggling with. Connection, only 68% of people felt connected to their colleagues and to their organisation. So people were struggling with that connection. And the work-life balance as well. People were kind of like struggling more with having that work-life balance when they were working from home. But we did the survey with an organisation called Leesman, and Leesman have what they call a Leesman Index, and that's a score from 0 to 100, and the score is your experience. So they kind of had this standard. If you had a Leesman Index score of over 70, it meant you were having an excellent experience. So if you were kind of doing it on an office, you would say that office is providing an excellent workplace experience if it was 70 or more. And Leesman had very few organizations who got over 70 in terms of having that excellent workplace experience. But what we found with the home working survey, they gave that a Leesman Index score, and the one for those 26,000 civil servants came out as 73.5. So the Leesman Index, the home working index, is far higher. So the people are having an excellent home working experience. So what we've got now is a new benchmark, really. The home is providing a lot for people, and the office needs to step up. So when we've done a few Leesman surveys on a few offices that aren't really kind of coming near that 70% because they're older estates offices. But that is kind of like our new benchmark. But a few kind of like key highlights that we found that would kind of influence how good the experience was at home. One of them was role complexity. So the more activities people need to complete and the more complex their role is, the worse experience they were having. It was harder for the home environment to meet all those needs. And a key driver, which is probably to be expected really in terms of how good people's experience was from working from home, was their home setup. So when people had their own office, their own study, their own kind of like separate room, they were having the best experience and they were having an excellent home working experience. And that kind of was like a bit of a sliding scale then. So then people who had an area kind of like away, like in the back of their lounge or something that was dedicated, like, a desk setup, they were still having a good experience, but the people who were having the worst experience would kind of like set up daily at like the kitchen table or be sat on the sofa and things like that. And what we're finding is that those people who've got that sort of setup want to return to the office more days a week. Those people who've got their own office, their own study, are ones who don't want to attend the office as many days a week. And the average we were finding post-COVID that people said they wanted to be in the office was 3 days per week post-COVID. So that kind of gave us a bit of an indication in terms of, our planning for a state post-COVID, and kind of gave us like some insights to kind of like take forward. So I'll pause there.
Yeah.
Great comments.
great stats, I think. So yeah, people like I think we're very slow to change. In my opinion, humans, we take a long time to change and adapt. And I'd be interested to know when that survey kind of was completed in comparison with the actual change of lifestyle or work life, because I'd be interested to, although we can't, take our views in a year's time, right? And then compare the two of them and see where we're going. But that's just a fact of life. We can't predict the future in that sense, I guess, or how we will feel. But people take their bad working the practices wherever they go. I used to work, and I probably still do, too much in terms of meetings, and my diary today has been back to back since 8 o'clock this morning in chunks of meetings, even though it is my birthday. But hey, you have to throw it in somewhere. That's bad practice. So when you take that bad practice and you finish a meeting 5-10 minutes early, you walk from one side of the building to the other, which me and you, Leah, used to do, and Giles, we used to finish a meeting and walk from one side of the building and say hello to somebody or go and speak to somebody, and that collaborative work, and you've got that kind of corridor conversation, the water fountain conversation at home. If you take that bad practice and take it home with you, it's just, I think it's worse. It's 10 times worse, because you're just going to go from a meeting to a meeting, and you're not going to have that level of interaction. So I think it's important for me, I think, to find or identify the right way of working for people, I guess. But yeah, I think it does the difference of productivity on how people think they're more productive at home. 80% of people, think that productivity is aided, I guess, at home, which is great. But how many of those people were in, say, more higher paid roles, for example, or more stable roles? That would be an interesting assessment, wouldn't it? Because I think there's in a small business, you can see the range and the scale much more. But we've got a whole mix of people at iCoTech, and I know in the government you'll have a whole mix and diverse range of individuals. But how productive am I at home is different to how productive someone else is at home who's maybe starting out in their career, who's in their parents' house, or is a graduate. For example, we've got 3 graduates at iCoTech now, which I'm really proud of, but they all live in 6-bedroom houses with their friends, and they're still in that. So it's a different normal for different people, isn't it? Yeah. That's just my view. Sorry for the blurby, but it was my view.
No, definitely. And there were some things we found. So the whole learning from others, I think you're right. I think those people who were earlier in their career really need that kind of support and guidance and mentoring, really, from people who are around them. And they perhaps are the people who are living in shared accommodation, like you're saying, so they haven't got the separate rooms. And so they may want to come back to the office 4 or 5 days a week. But the people they need to learn from may be more senior and maybe a bit, I'm going to talk about myself now, a bit more middle-aged, I'm happy to say. And so if those people are having a good experience at home because they've got their own separate office and their own separate space, they're not going to want to be in the office as often. So how are those more junior roles going to be able to learn from them? And I think that is a bit of a conundrum, really. And I suppose we talk about our kids having missed school and having missed education. Well, what about those people who are at the start of their career? What are they missing out on as well? Are they going to be able to develop as much as they could have if they had access to those people? Yeah. But another thing we did find as well, that the whole bit about the social interaction, I mentioned that people were kind of struggling with that social interaction. The people at higher grades were struggling far, far more with that than people at lower grades. And I think especially, at the start of the pandemic, there was a lot of online team collaboration and quizzes and kind of that sort of social interaction. But I'm not sure that those people at senior grades were included in that sort of thing. And I think they were missing out on that. So maybe those senior people are there and they are available. It's just, are people reaching out to them maybe?
I know that's a difficult one. For me, I think if you're more of a leader than a manager and an executor in an organization, then isn't the way in which you lead by communicating 80% of the time, by that dialogue, by the corridor conversation, by the walking around the office and talking and being there. So I think that I could see myself anyway in that, back to that influencer leadership kind of perspective, just not being on the phone and not being communicating with people makes me feel probably subconsciously that I'm not doing my job, because I'm not.
It's different. It's really different for you though. So in a larger organization, I would counter that senior leadership comment or the leadership comment and say, realistically, prior to COVID, how much interaction did senior leadership really have with those junior roles or those junior and mid-level roles. If I'm totally honest, in my experience, there wasn't any of that. It sounds a bit trite for them to turn around and mention that. Now, I could be completely wrong, but I would suggest that sort of idea that they were open to that interaction in the office, they were making themselves available for coffee meetings, and they were engaging. I don't think that's really realistic, and potentially looking at ways of having that interaction now, or it's highlighted. I don't know. So sometimes you get this. So when in the civil service or work, you'd have senior leaders that come and they give a talk in the kitchen area. So they might feel that that's the interaction they're getting. But how many people from a junior level or a mid-level would feel comfortable airing their views or their feelings or comments? So I think there's a whole bunch of stuff. I think some of the anonymity provided by online, so things like a Slido or something like that, or a Teams chat where you can be anonymous and actually provide anonymous feedback, actually increases people's ability or their feeling of safety to ask those awkward questions, ask those difficult questions of our senior leaders. And I've seen it. Whereas if you actually are a person stood in front of a group of people in the office, it's that stupid question feeling, or that, I don't know how am I going to appear when I mention stuff. So I think there's a bit there. I do like the Gary's comment, like just to mention offices. Are we trying to do something that is unachievable? So from my perspective, looking at AV hardware, so we've discussed accessibility at great length with the Civil Service Disability Network. We've discussed it with the adaptive technology teams about how to create an accessible environment for those people who require adaptive technology. We've come to the conclusion that you can't create a meeting room or a collaboration space that is totally accessible to everyone from a space of like actually all that technology being there in the meeting room. So what we've done is we're trying to enable the user to then use their adaptive technology. So the question is, are we trying to please too many? Are we trying to solve too many things in the office? So get that collaboration, get that mentoring and learning from the junior levels, plus that sort of cafe culture in the middle, plus the quiet spaces, plus the meeting rooms of the interactive spaces and the senior leadership engagement. Actually, what we're trying to do too much, and potentially the office we should focus more on a narrower set of requirements for the office and allow those other areas that clearly have come out of the Leesman report, that actually you leave some of those task-based activities where people are working effectively at home, and we try and reinvent the way we use the offices rather than trying to fit the old way of working to the new balance of working in the office.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm gonna do a quick time check. I mean we're 22, and I feel like we could talk about this for ages. But your subtopic 2, Leah, is about the workplace of the future, I guess, and why are people coming back to the office, and I think that might help address some of those questions as well. Is that cool to touch base on that?
Yeah, happy to. Just to note as well, in case people are interested, we did have a report, like it's a full Leesman report that's available online if anyone's interested in looking at that full write-up based on that survey we did last summer. So if you did want to find it, if you Google home working and the UK civil service, you will find the full report on gov.uk.
Cool, thanks, Leah.
I know you like finding these things, Joel. Oh, sorry, not Google.
On Bing. I'm joking.
If you put it into a search engine.
Cool.
Yeah, so where do we go now? So obviously we learnt a lot from Leesman, and especially around the sorts of activities that work well at home and those that don't, that are a bit more of a challenge at home. And there was a lot of thinking at the start, and I think this is kind of like global really, in terms of the fact that, actually post-COVID, people will want to come back for collaboration and for social interaction. But the thinking has kind of changed a bit more now in terms of, yes, that's one of the main needs people will want to come back for. But actually the most important task people still need to do is that kind of like individual desk-based kind of like focused work, whether that's kind of like answering emails, writing reports, writing documents, processing documents, whatever it is. So that is still the most important activity. And in terms of like the Leesman 21 activities, that is like nearly always the top one. So I think we need to be aware, even if people are coming into the office, to collaborate, for social interaction, or for whatever reason it is, they are going to need a space to be able to do that sort of activity. So our workplace of the futures can't just be collaboration, social. We do need to have those spaces where people can touch down, they can do desk-based work. So I think that's one of the kind of the main things to remember. And in terms of when we're kind of like planning our future workplaces, it's going to differ from organisation to department to team. And I think it's really important that we understand how each of our team wants to work. So we encourage things like team charters to understand how do people want to work, because how you as a manager or as a leader want to work, it will differ across all of your team. Some will want to come back to work 5 days a week. Some may prefer to work from home. So I think it's about that conversation, and it's about making sure that we're having those conversations and understanding how our people want to work. And then talking about and getting that data and that insight. Why do people want to come back into the office? And also us as businesses, why do we need them to come back into the office? And it's not just, you know, we can't just be going back to, because that's the way we've always worked. It has to be, you know, we need to be thinking about it and actually spending time thinking about, what do I want to get out of, you know, what's the value from having people come in? Why do I need them to come in? And then how do I encourage them in? Well, how do I make sure they've got what they need when they do come in? And I think it's kind of like the point you were making earlier, Giles, about hybrid teams. So going forward, those workplaces of the future do have to have those spaces that allow for hybrid ways of working. I think there's going to be far more people in the office and at home, and it's going to be that mix. And how do we make sure when we're collaborating that we're not just collaborating with select few who are either at home and they're all doing it online, or just the ones who are in the office? And how do we have spaces that meet that need, you know, whether it's acoustics, whether it's a technology, and whether it's just like those ways of working. So I think that's quite a big piece to look at. And a big challenge we've got at the moment as well is this whole smoothing the week. So we've heard a lot of departments and organisations, whether they're kind of like government or private sector, talking about rationalising their estate. You know, they don't need as much estate going forward. They can either kind of like free up floors, free up space. So if they're planning to point to the same number of people at a smaller space, how do you make sure they don't all turn up on a Tuesday at 10:30? And then you've got the same amount of people you had before in that space. So that's kind of like a really interesting challenge that we're just starting to kind of like talk, well, we talk about it for a while, but just starting to kind of like work through some ideas in terms of how we're going to manage that. And there's a few things we've been looking at. So one of them is around booking a place in the building. So as opposed to booking a desk, you kind of say, I'm going to be in this building on Tuesday, and there'll be a finite number of spaces in that building. And that means you've got access to use all the different workspaces that are in there. Or how do you incentivize quieter days? You know, your Mondays and Fridays are a bit quieter. Do you have events on those days, or do you kind of like incentivize with food and with
Free food.
coffees or even free parking? You know, if you've got parking, but what can you do to incentivize that? Or some departments have even talked about kind of like rotas and allocating like teams that'll come in on a certain day. So there's a few different options, but that, I mean, this is going to be like a really big challenge now. If organizations are rationalizing their estate, how do we make sure that people don't make that journey and then there's no space for them? Because that's really what we don't want.
Absolutely, and all those are exciting challenges to have, aren't they? And solutions to finding solutions to problems, you know, is obviously exciting and great to see. The question I have, Leah, is where do you think the workplace, the provision of a suitable workplace, sits within the organisation in terms of, you know, HR does our contracts, our employment contracts, and payroll does our pay, you know, IT does our tech, but workplace seems to touch across all those pillars. So like for a business like us, or a medium-sized business that's got HR, who owns workplace, and like where do you see it fitting as a service, I guess? And if you haven't discussed it, where would you think, in your opinion, that it would sit?
Well, that's an interesting one, because I think traditionally, it's always kind of like sat in estates, or it's tended to sit in estates, and estates can either kind of like be standalone, or it can be part of HR or part of like another function. But I think the most important thing is that those estates decisions are driven by data and insight. So I think there has to be a really close pairing between, whatever part of the organization it is that would be responsible for that, whether it's I'm trying to think of the sort of departments,
HR probably, or finance and places like that, isn't it?
or
Really?
whether you have got like your own data and insights team, or
But digital should be able to do that. They should be able to look at the data. They should be able to assist facilities creating a facilities management platform. And there are them out there that look at room occupancy. They look at heating. They look at like flow of people around the building. So that, and using those insights, Leah, absolutely where we want to go, rather than making biased decisions which are based on our own experiences and our own desires. At the end of the day, there could be a small group of people, regardless of whether it's diverse, is still asking a small group of people to make decisions about the workplace for potentially thousands of people. So, for example, the building that I used to work in had 3,500 people capacity, but 5,000 people assigned to the building. You can have a small bunch of people, 10, 20 people max, making decisions for all of those people. So I completely agree. Evidence-based decision making, rather than, I think we should have 10 cubicles on this floor.
Yeah,
and I think that makes sense, in Bays, but selfishly thinking about little old me and my 13 people in iCoHub, where I'm not going to go and invest in, although I'm not going to invest in a product to go and capture footprint and footfall, and the organizations in the middle are 200, 500 people organizations that potentially don't have an estates department as well. They won't have an estates department, or even somebody to manage it. It's just about thinking. I think it's interesting to think about where that service of workplace provision is going to sit in the future. And I doubt your MBA covered it, Giles, in terms of, I doubt that was in there, because it was such a new service as well, such a new challenge as well. So, the other thing for me is, how is education going to catch up and start teaching leaders and students through the process, because it is so new to us, isn't it? But exciting challenge.
Yeah, I think as well, I think it's about asking the right questions. So, I mean, we tend to find as well, as you're kind of saying, Giles, when we deal with estates people, they tend to ask for desks and meeting rooms, because that's all anyone ever asks them for, because that's all they've ever known. So if you ask the right questions, like, what activities do you complete and how well is that supported? If you can understand what those roles are, then we can kind of like talk about, well, what sort of spaces do you need? And part of it could be an education piece. Like we were saying, those different types of spaces are a fairly new thing. If we've worked in a traditional office, they may not have had those different spaces.
Yeah.
But you're looking there to adapt people's approach. So people have to re-educate themselves and learn. And just going to chat, Will's point, this is it's not the same area, but it's the same point, is he's mentioning that mentoring of junior staff, regardless of what level they are, because I still need mentoring, even at DD level, I still need mentoring for my progression. But it's about, how do we change the way we do it, rather than returning to the way we used to do it. So much like your point about facilities saying, actually, we need meeting rooms and we need task-based space. It's actually re-educating yourself and thinking, actually, how do we change it? Much like with the mentoring, we're not going to go back, or it's unlikely we'll go back to the 5 days a week, although I saw several things recently about the likelihood of that happening. It's not about returning to that and then forcing people back into that. It's about looking at ways to change the way we mentor people, especially those people who feel that they need it from a junior perspective. And we're looking at grads, but actually throughout the organization, you need mentoring. So how do we go about mentoring people in that way? So it's about that re-education. I don't think it's always easy to switch back to the way you were. So it's easy to turn around and say, we need meeting rooms and we need some desks. Yeah. Brilliant. But it's just interesting that your point you raised, Leah, it's about re-educating ourselves and re-looking at the problem and coming up with a solution.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. I'm just conscious of time, so we've got seven minutes left. Leah, did you want to come on to your third subtopic, or did you cover it in your previous two?
I've kind of covered it, but probably the last point, and I don't know, I'm happy to pick it up, or yourself, Giles. We've been looking at different types of personas and different types of roles, because this hybrid worker is kind of like a new role. So that's something we've been kind of like looking at and working with other departments, and I think Giles is like a large part of the topic you've been working on. So this kind of like hybrid role is kind of like a new thing that's evolving, really. So there's kind of like four main personas that we've got at the moment, and one is kind of like workplace based. So you're kind of like located within an office where you kind of like use that office to complete your role. The next one is a hybrid worker, where you can kind of work from the office or work from home or other locations. You've got mobile workers who will frequently be working, in different locations all over the place. And then you've got your home workers who's kind of like contractually based as a home worker. And we've kind of like shaped those personas, but then we kind of like left it down to departments then to start to look at their policies and decisions around each of those personas. Because it will differ so much from department to department, because you really got to think about the departments and the team's individual needs and ways of working. But I think it's about people kind of spending time looking into those and kind of thinking, well, how do we support them? Looking into those personas and how would they work within our department, and using user journeys really to kind of like plan out how would things work for them. Have we got provision in place for them? Have we got what they're going to need? Have we got the policies? Have we got the spaces and the support? So I think there's a lot of work to do there, because, I think things are going to change. I really hope things aren't going to go back to exactly how they were before. But there's a lot of time and thought that kind of needs to go into kind of shaping that going forward.
Yeah, and just having just thinking about those, writing those down for my own kind of selfish kind of requirements in business. Although Giles looks like he's frozen, but hopefully, he's back. So it might be my side, but yeah, having a persona, a set of, I guess, standards, it'll help you drive that informed data decision as well. When you're capturing how many times are those personas going into the office, or how many times are they consuming the services of the office, you're able to kind of categorize actually your homework or your workplace base, because your job is to open a letter, scan it in a machine, and print it off the other side. So you're a workplace role. Your role is a workplace. But as if you're a mobile fitter or a mobile mechanic, then you're a mobile worker, right? So you have different roles in the business associated to different personas, and therefore if you're capturing your data, linking that back to personas, you'll be able to estimate the services that you need to provision for your workforce. And that's great. And an interesting way of looking at it. We are 5 minutes out. Go on.
Just one point on that. Actually, I can talk about my own bias there, because I look at this from a knowledge worker perspective. Like, I'm a knowledge worker. At the end of the day, I sit down and I come up, I write policy. I'm not kind of building anything. Yes, I'm implementing and configuring from an IT perspective. Yeah, fine. And I'm assisting departments in their configuration and change and transformation. But I'm a knowledge worker at the end of the day. If you go to my sister-in-law works in DEFRA. She used to work out in the field as a field worker, going to site, going to farms, doing testing. So my own biases then lead to a perception of how we are going to work and what the questions that I ask. So it goes back to your point, Leah, about asking the right questions, driving those personas, looking at where that person sits on the spectrum of, this person is fully in the office all the time because they need to be. They are doing this task that actually they have to be in the office for, to fundamentally someone who has no reason to be in the office, or they're always on site. So that spectrum, and there isn't. Developing then those user journeys is really important to really understand whether we're making the right decisions around those spaces. It's fascinating. There's so much work to be done, and we're only scratching the surface, and we're supposed to be all back in the office after the 21st, potentially. Which is really tough. We've not got much time.
Yeah, and on that, I think that's I think this topic is so broad. There's so many things that
Yeah.
we can do, isn't there? And it's really interesting to get your perspective, Lee, and the kind of the data and the stats that you've been a part of. And I've definitely learned a lot. I've got new personas today. I've got new terms for my workplace, so I'm happy about that. Loving that. I'm gonna go and create. In iCoHub, we're gonna have a focus space, a touchdown space. They're doing emails. We're gonna have a collaboration space. And a
Ping pong
breakout
table.
space as well. So it's no longer iCoDesk. It might be iCo Workplace or whatever. If anybody wants to invest, let me know info at. But yeah, so we're going to be booking out. But using technology as a potential to it kind of tell you what space you need. Imagine in the future, I might go and ring up Bill and say, imagine in the future you put an agenda into an Outlook invite and you invite a number of attendees, and it tells you actually, because you've got 10 employees here or 10 attendees that have accepted, we're going to book out this collaboration space for you. Actually, instead of accepting the meeting saying, yes, I'm going to be there, but what about in the future? I'm going to be there, but attend on Teams, not in person. All those kind of technology advances, I think we can utilize in the future. Subject to technology, catching up and driving us forward. And then it could use the data we've got from the footfall, the footprint, and the heat maps of the buildings to be able to, and the car park barriers to be able to tell us actually, you've got 10 people invited to this meeting, of which 3 of them have accepted work from home, and the other 4 are going to come into the office. Therefore, you need this space, and it automatically books it for you. How cool would that be? So if anybody's got that requirement, let me know, because I could have some fun with that. But yeah, so we're a couple of minutes out. Thank you, Kerry and Will, for your questions in the chat. And thank you, everybody, for attending this session. Much appreciated. I think we've definitely got to do another one of these. We've got to do another one of these in like 2-3 months' time, Leah. Get you back in and get a kind of
Once
another.
We're back in the office, yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how it's changed, or whether hopefully once we've changed to a bit of hybrid working, it'll be fascinating to see how things have changed for yourself within the GPA.
Yeah. And I think just in summary, I'm going to try and summarize everything that Leah said, and I'm going to do my best endeavors here, right? But I think, as you said, Leah, it's all about a choice, of people making their own choice, empowering your teams to make the right decisions and to decide for themselves where's best to work on that day. The workplace, the modern workplace of the future is going to change, and all those cool terms that and meanings for different spaces is going to change. And that design guide that I've Bing search doesn't sound right, does it? Saying Bing search, but that design guide I think is awesome. I'm definitely going to take that and use that going forward. We also talked about leadership and how leadership is going to change, and how you are going to influence people in a new hybrid working environment. Giles, your points were around the cultural change, role modeling. Why are we going back to the office, which we discussed at some point, but maybe as a next step we could do a conversation on specifically why and what that workplace of the future is going to look like for our teams. And then Leah, you gave us some good stats on how people are feeling about productivity at home, and the number of people that are feeling productive, or that it's aided productive working at home, which is great. We talked about the hybrid workspace personas then, so workplace, hybrid, mobile, or home working personas. Hopefully I've summarized most of it there, but it's no longer about desks and spaces. It's about provision of a workplace and empowering people to make those decisions on where's best to work. And on that note, it's 5 o'clock. I'm going to open the call up as we're on Teams normal, not Teams live. I'm going to ask anybody who's on the session to, if you have a question or you have a viewpoint you want to share with us, please do feel free to take yourself off mute and just ask a question of Leah or Giles, and we'll happily answer that. Or even if you want to put a comment into the chat window as well, I'm more than happy to answer any of those questions. These sessions are really enjoyable. Thank you, Leah, for joining. It's much appreciated. Thank you very much for coming along to the session. It's been great to have you. So these are recorded. They're on YouTube. They're also on Spotify as well. I still can't believe we're on Spotify. I actually listened
for all our fans. I haven't listened to us yet. I feel it's almost like cringe where they listen to your own voice. It's painful. I'm trying to avoid it.
Yeah, absolutely. But Leah, have you got any final passing summary thoughts or points?
Wow, Joel, I think you summarised that beautifully, really, the conversation. I think that kind of like captured the whole thing. I think it's going to be interesting what's going to happen post-COVID, and the experience that we're going to have. I think it's all going to be about that user or customer experience, when we're back in the office. Like I said, I think people have got a new benchmark now with home. I think the office has got to kind of like step up now.
Yeah.
The experience a lot of people have had at home. And if we do want people back in, why do we want them back in? And you know, if we do, we need to make sure it's providing what they need.
Absolutely. Yeah, give them a reason to come in, a value add, better than the home life, right? And that's going to be difficult to provision, isn't it? But thank you very much, Leah, for coming in. Much appreciated. Thanks, Giles, for supporting us again and
pleasure.
and co-hosting this with me. Much appreciated. And thanks to Laura and the team at iCoTech for facilitating and advertising this stuff. I really do appreciate it. The next one will be in a month's time, and we'll send out some more communications on that. Yeah, thank you very much, guys. Stay safe, stay healthy. Always have fun, as always. But thanks, Leah. Thanks, Giles. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Much appreciated.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.